Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this scrutiny meeting of the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Board. I'd like to welcome everyone here and everyone that's watching at home. I'd also like to remind people that the meeting is being webcast, and I'd also like to note that there's a link to view the recording on the meeting's website. For the benefit of members of the public watching the webcast, we're going to introduce ourselves. So my name's Councillor Hannah Bithell. I represent Kirkstall and I chair this board. And I'll go round to my left. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Isaac Wilson. I'm a councillor in Wheatwood.
Good morning. Eleanor Thompson, councillor for Guiseley and Rawdon and substituting this morning.
Good morning. My name's Sonia Layton, councillor for Guiseley and Rawdon.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Scopes, councillor for Beeston Holbeck.
Good morning, councillor Annie Maloney, Beeston Holbeck Walk, and I'm also substituting.
Morning, everybody. Katie Dye, councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad for Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Councillor Matthew Robinson from the Harewood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Neil Buckley from Old Woodley Ward.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce Becky Atherton, our Principal Scrutiny Advisor. Thank you. So we'll move straight on to the agenda. And if I can ask Becky to run through items 1 to 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 1, appeals. There are no appeals of refusals against inspection of documents. Item 2, exclusions. There are no items excluded from the public domain today. Item 3, late items. No late items today. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask members to disclose any interests in accordance with the City Council's Code of Conduct? I'll take silence as none. And finally, item 5, apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Ali, Councillor Maloney is substituting, Councillor Miller, Councillor Thompson is substituting, and also Councillor Lay, who's unwell this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6 then, which is approving the minutes as a correct record of the meeting. Becky, are you happy to comment on outstanding matters, please?
With regard to minute 9, as requested, Krista Jolly has produced proposals along with Councillor Lennox and Councillor Bithell for some training sessions on affordable housing delivery, along with a private roundtable discussion with stakeholders. Those sessions are anticipated to take place in September, October and November to inform your scheduled public discussion in January on the refresh of the Leeds Affordable Housing Growth Partnership Action Plan. So dates will follow shortly for those. I'm also liaising with colleagues with regard to timetabling the additional items you requested as part of the work item last month.
Thanks very much, Becky. Any comments from members or any inaccuracies? No? Are we happy to agree that the minutes are accurate then? Lovely, I'm seeing nods. Excellent, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item number 7, which is our highways maintenance strategy. This paper has been produced in response to a white paper considered by full council in March. The paper will be submitted to Executive Board later this year and is coming to the Scrutiny Board for pre-decision consideration. Before I do anything else, I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank officers for bringing it for pre-decision. And also for the considerable work that's gone into it. I'm really looking forward to the debate. So if I hand straight over to you, Gary, thank you. And if you're all right, everyone to just introduce yourselves as you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation. Perhaps if I ask the team to introduce themselves now, please.
Tony Penniston, Senior Principal Engineer, Asset Management.
Morning, everybody. I'm Simon Swift, Executive Manager for Asset Management and Highway Services.
Morning, everybody. I'm Oliver Priestley. I'm the Head of Civil Engineering and Infrastructure.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Transport and Sustainable Development.
Okay, there's a detailed report, as the chair has mentioned, in front of you. I hope that's of interest and helpful to aid debate this morning. I'm not going to go through it line by line, as members will be pleased to hear that, but I would like to draw out some key points, if I may. First point I would make is that highways maintenance has always been top or near the top of public perception surveys. So highways maintenance has always been a high priority for the council and obviously for councillors and residents over many years. And that importance is reflected in the nearly £200 million additional capital that Leeds City Council has contributed to highways maintenance programmes since 2010, supplementing the grants that we get from government. And the table in the report reflects that. It is the case, though, that despite that level of local and central government capital funding, plus the revenue funding we received, and a clear strategic asset management approach, which I'm sure we'll touch on in more detail in a minute, which helps us to determine and prioritise our work, we are in a managed decline position across a network that spans 3,000 kilometres of carriageways and nearly 5,000 kilometres of footways. The very poor wet weather that we've all experienced over the last 12 months with numerous storms has had a significant impact on the condition of the network. And as the report sets out, pothole numbers have significantly increased over the last 12 months. We've deployed more resource to assist, but it's fair to say it remains a challenge. The mantra that the service receives, certainly from me and from exec members in the past, has always been to spend grant received from central government as it's received each year. And we continue to do that successfully year in, year out. And that's no mean achievement. And some authorities do not do that. It is also fair to say, though, that significant inflation pressures in recent times mean the number of schemes that were capable of being delivered has been impacted. Prior to the general election, there were some announcements relating to Network North, which indicated more resource and more funding being made available in this area. As you'll see in one of the tables, some of that has been received. It's quite marginal in terms of the level of spend that we have, but more was expected, but no definitive details were provided at that time. And obviously with the general election just over, we await further details around that funding. As the report sets out, we are reviewing a number of issues across highways maintenance. It's called the revitalisation programme, to see if new ways of working, new processes or materials will assist us in our endeavours. So it's part of our continuous improvement agenda that we have. In summary then, a very important area of work with a great deal of resource being deployed and to identify new ways of working. The issues being experienced on the highway are not peculiar to Leeds as the highway authority. Nationally, organisations put the highways maintenance backlog across the country at £16.3 billion, with Leeds's being circa 300 million. I'll leave it there, Chair, to allow, I think, lots of questions that will flow. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Any questions from members? Councillor Scopes?
Thank you very much, Chair. So I've got a few questions, Gary, if that's okay. So I guess the first one is around how do the different varying quality of roads vary across the city? So I guess I'm particularly interested in where we prioritise in, or where are the most, I guess, red and amber roads. My second question is around what you talk about. Every road in Leeds receives a walk safety inspection at least annually. Given there's 2,944 kilometres, I'm just trying to understand the process. I don't imagine we actually walk down all of those kilometres, and obviously we're not allowed in on motorways. And I guess there's a link question to that around inspecting pavements. There's a lot of pavements, I would say, in the city that are not of adequate standard? And then the third one, just in terms of just to fully understand the financial aspect, it looks to me like from paragraphs 13 and 14, they're expecting to fall effectively 5 million further behind over this year. And I just wanted to check that's right on top of the 288 million, because I'm conscious that paragraph 38 talks about other funding. And sorry, and one last question. The 16.3 billion nationally versus the 300 million that we have here. Can you just comment on what proportion that is relative to the proportion of roads that we have in Leeds, just so we can see if we are ahead or behind, broadly speaking? Thank you.
Tony Penniston, Principal Engineer. Quite a few questions there, so I hope I don't miss anything out. Basically, we have 11 inspectors, highway inspectors, that carry out safety inspections across the network. We have a team of 4 engineers that carry out condition surveys. So they will have a look at all those streets across the network, and they will grade them insofar as red, amber, low amber and green regarding their condition, what work's required. They will also look at whereabouts they are on the life cycle of that road. So whether it's got several years of life left, whether it's got a couple of years life left, or whether it needs doing now. So basically from that, with other factors taken into account, both the hierarchy of the road and the footway, whether we've had any public complaints about that, whether we've had any councillor complaints, whether we've had any accident complaints, we can take all that information into account and prioritise a list of those in the greatest need, both on a separate network basis and holistically across the whole network. So we can look at everything and we can say, right, the principal network is in a certain condition, therefore the money that we've got, can allocate so much to that. The classified network, the B and C network, there's so much in red, we'll allocate so much to that and prioritise it. And then the same with the local roads, the unclassified network. So we've got a prioritisation system for the condition. Taking into account of that, it's all the safety inspections as well. So you commented that there's 2,944 kilometres and we've got 11 inspectors. They're not all walked. Our inspection system is a combination of both walked and driven inspections. So again, depending on the hierarchy of either the footway or the carriageway will dictate what regime it goes on to. So the ones of highest importance on the driven surveys will be driven on the carriageways on a monthly basis. The ones lower down will get done on a quarterly basis, and then the footways, dependent on their status. So this is answering your pavements one. We have 5 categories of footway, and it'll be prestige walking zone. So that's your city centre ones, your primary walking routes, the urban district centres, Putsey, Morley, Wetherby, Garforth, areas like that, and routes to railway stations, main schools, doctor's surgery, large shopping complexes and everything else, secondary walking routes, and then linked footways and local road footways. So based on that, again, all the ones in the city centre are walked on a monthly basis. The ones in the district centres are walked on a monthly basis. Then we have quarterly inspections, 6 monthly inspections, and generally the local roads are done on an annual basis. So those combination means that we're visiting some streets, so we're actually walking more than that 2,944 kilometres in some terms, because some will be driven 12 times a year, some will be done 4 times a year, whether they're quarterly or everything else. So during that, we're looking for any safety defects, whether there's any potholes, whether there's any barriers, whether there's curbs sticking out or anything else. So those are passed to the DLO. Again, we can take that into account when we're looking at the condition surveys that we've on a regular basis, we're getting called out to a street because of the number of pothole repairs that's been carried out there. So it makes common sense that if you've got one street that's in a poor condition, we've already had 2 complaints, we've only had 2 safety defect reports, and you've got another one where you've got 10. The one with the 10 reports gets prioritised a little bit higher. I think your other question was relating to the backlog. The backlog is calculated based on the length of our network and the length of red, amber and green. So we know how much a reconstruction costs basically for the principal network, for the distributor network and the unclassified network. So we could times the length of red out by the average cost that it takes to do that. The ambers tend to be preventative treatments such as surface dressing or micro asphalt, and we can times that length out, and then you've got minor repairs. So we can cost all that up and come up with a backlog, which is how we've come up with 288 million. And based on that, that means that at the current level of funding, it's probably going to take us something like 17.6 years to reduce that backlog on the current budgets that we're getting. So it's a significant amount of time. Where we sit with other authorities on backlog, it's difficult to say, because it's not a question that's asked. We have a couple of surveys, the AIA, the Asphalt Alliance Industry, and we have the Alarm Survey. There's a couple of surveys, and it's not particularly asked that question. And backlog has always been a contentious area in highway maintenance, insofar as it depends how it's defined within your local authority. Backlog is the amount of work required to bring the network up into a satisfactory condition. Now, what's meant by a satisfactory condition? In lead satisfactory condition, we might be happy that all local roads have 2 or 3 potholes in. That's our satisfactory condition. Another authority, it might be 0 tolerance on potholes. So it's bringing it up to that satisfactory condition. Ours, the backlog that we've quoted is to bring all streets into a satisfactory condition where they're green, they're a state of green. I hope that answers your questions.
I think just to add, it is likely that it will move out to 293 million, which I think was part of the question. That could go out even further because of inflation as well.
Just add to that, that 5 million, that's based on what we do is we know by year on year we've got a deteriorating network, so we can calculate the number of roads that are roughly deteriorating from red to high amber to low amber and everything else. So we can calculate that deterioration model. So basically we look at our network and it's 2,944 kilometres, apply the deterioration model and we'll end up with X kilometres of deterioration. We come up with a programme and plan of what we're going to deliver in the next year. That will give us a length of improvement, and take one from the other, it gives us that difference. At the moment, that difference is X kilometres, and we work in street sections, and all streets are split into 250 metre chunks to make it simple. So that equates to 96 sections. So the average cost for a local road refurbishment is something like 56,000. So if you times the 96 by 56,000, you end up with about 3.4 million pounds. 5.4 million pounds, sorry.
Thank you for that. Just thanks for those responses. Just to push back on those things. So firstly, you didn't mention sort of mapping out the quality of roads across the city. So can you provide that at a later date? Secondly, and sorry if I'm being pernickety here, on paragraph 26, it explicitly says every road in Leeds receives a walked safety inspection. I think that's technically not quite right, just for future reports. I guess the point about payments, I think you said they receive an annual inspection. Do you also look at things like routes that get underneath pavements? So I would say I get a lot of trip hazard type pavements across from in my ward. And then on the point about how we're doing against other cities, just again push back on that, because you've quoted a figure, a national figure of 16 billion, and you've quoted our figure. So I guess there must be some data behind that. And I understand your caveat saying we might not be exactly where it is, but I could easily do a percentage of 300 million over 16 billion, but I don't know how to compare that to how many roads that we are maintaining versus how many roads there are in the country. Thank you.
Maybe if I start on those, then yes, we can provide a map. So that answers the first one. Not sure what process will follow, if it's just for your ward or because it could involve considerable amount of work, but maybe we can liaise with Becky on that. Yes, the commented about walked surveys, that does need to be corrected. We picked that up and we need to address that for the executive board. So thank you for that. In terms, I'll skip over the pavement strip hazard one and let my colleagues pick that up. Yeah, as Tony mentioned, the 16.3 billion and 300 million, we provide that information into these organisations that provide these sort of national surveys or reports. We haven't interrogated those further or spent a great deal of time telling us what that means. I think my overview would be that as a core city, we are doing well. And if you look at some of the feedback through national highways transportation surveys, which are in the report, we do seem to be regarded as doing okay. I'm not saying here that our roads are in excellent condition, because we can all see the issues that are on the network. Not saying that at all. There are issues, but the team is working very hard to address them with the funds that we've got and to maximise what we can get out on the ground in the most efficient way. But maybe we do need to do a bit more work around the 16.3 billion and where we sit with that. Happy to do that. Maybe if one of the colleagues can pick up the trip hazard question.
Yes, when we're doing a safety inspection, we're looking at about 9 elements when we walk down a footway and a carriageway. So we're looking at the left curb, we'll walk up one side, and we'll walk down the other, and we'll walk back up the road. So we look at the left curb, the left footway, the carriageway, the right curb, the right footway. We also pick up any defects with trees. If there's trees on the street, we pick up any enforcement action. If somebody is having some work done and there's building materials on the footway, if their edges are overgrown, we pass those issues to the enforcement team. We'll also look at any section 81 issues, which is where the statutory undertakers apparatus, if there's a broken BT box lid or anything else like that. So there's on every single inspection that we do, so it can be defendable against any third-party claims, we're recording any defects against those 9 elements. When they pick a defect up, they will do a risk assessment that's based on the risk matrix, and they will pick that up and they will create a works order, and that works order will go directly to our DLO team that'll pick it up and deal with it in the appropriate response time. If it's a bigger job, then they might just make a note, and then that'd come through to the other team that would then go out and do a condition survey. Because obviously on some of these streets, the work is beyond just a safety repair, a bit of tarmac to repair that pothole or that curb. And it might be passed to the maintenance team. And depending on the value of work required, it will either go to general maintenance or it'll come to my asset management team to do a comprehensive assessment of that street and its condition. And then it's down to us to prioritise it within the big scheme of everything else and see where it sits on the priority scheme. And then it's a case of keeping it safe until such times as we can do the necessary repairs. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Councillor Scopes. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I've got 2 questions on the finances and 2 others. On page 28 of the papers, the table, it indicates that in 2010-11, the total spend was £26 million. And expenditure in 2023-24 is £34 million, which is an increase of 32%. Now, inflation since then has been 39%. So are we saying that that's a 7% actual reduction in real terms. And also the contribution of Network North funding of £2 million seems to suggest that that's disguising a cut by the city of £2 million, it seems to me. Now, on page 21, it refers to the pothole repair, funding for pothole repairs. And the total budget allocation for 2024-25 is in round figures £5 million. This allocation is virtually unchanged since 2014-15, but in 2010-11 was £7.5 million. So is that saying that spending on pothole repairs is down by a third since 2010? Now, I can ask my two other questions now, or? Yeah. Okay. Now, it mentions in the report, innovative permanent repair techniques will also be assessed. Well, what's this likely to be? Because there are actually not many people around this table who'll remember the former councillor Matthew Lubley, now an alderman. And in 2010, he had an idea of producing a machine, and it got various trials and so on, which would actually excavate a circular patch in the roadway, take it out, the damaged bit, and would simply replace it by another circular lump of material. Now, if that's still the case and we're still looking at things like that, why has it taken us 14 years? And also, these papers are from 2022. This is the year's deficit. And it's all done by, every ward is on these papers. And for instance, Armley has got 28 years deficit, but Ardsley and Robin Hood only 5 years. Beeston and Holbeck, 45 years. Harewood, it's obviously due to my colleague here on my right, 8.5 years. What on earth is going on, please?
Shall I pick up some of the funding questions first? So yes, on Appendix A3, the total from 25.9 million to 34.4 from 2010 to 11, 23-24. If you look on the top of page 18, you can look at the inflationary difference between those 2 years, where here is demonstrated comparable amounts of 23.8 million in 2010-11 is roughly 34.8 million in inflation. So I think those are comparable. I think it shows that they're broadly similar. It's probably a slight reduction when you're taking inflation into account, but they are broadly similar amounts. You mentioned the government funding. Actually, we had a question about this in full council from Councillor Flynn, I believe it was, who asked whether, I'm sure he's watching live at home, but he asked whether we'd spent all of the, I think it was, he asked whether we'd spent all the Network North funding of just over 2 million. And we have, and actually that additional government funding actually only accounts this past year for 8.2% of the spend on potholes. So I think that signifies that as a council, we're putting a significant amount in of our own capital in beyond additional government funding. Of course, additional government funding is welcome, but it was clear that that additional funding barely touched the sides on some of the backlog, as was demonstrated in the initial presentation. Obviously, as we speak, I know the Parliament is gearing up for the King's Speech. The new Prime Minister has said that better transport and building infrastructure are going to be the two priorities of that King's Speech. So I'll certainly be watching with keen ears to hear whether this is something which will be addressed, because I think it's something we are struggling with across the country. I don't think Leeds is unique in that at all.
If I can come back on some of the other points as well, and just put on notice, colleagues, if they can perhaps be prepared to answer the disparity in the sort of backlog on wards, please. Yeah, the funding picture is complex, and that's why we produced this table, because of the different streams that are coming in, so that we can keep track of it ourselves. In an ideal world, it would be nice to have, almost excuse the pun, one pot of money that we can have great certainty over a longer period of time for, so that we can plan our work. But you can see that it's subject to additional funding that comes in at different times, and we seek to spend it as best we can. In terms of the innovative permanent repair comment, and Councillor Lubley, I distinctly remember Councillor Lubley coming. I think it's fair to say, I remember a highways maintenance engineer coming to me and saying that almost every day someone comes to them with the solution to potholes, be it the actual machine or the material that is used. We do look at it as the industry does, and there are some benefits to what comes forward and some disadvantages. It's all about the scale of the issues across a city like Leeds, the speed of repair that's involved with the material that is suggested, or the machine itself that's suggested, and obviously the cost. And then it's a balance about which one we seek to pursue. So, as I say, long history of innovative ideas coming forward. We do try new machines on a regular basis and new materials. And in fact, to the north of Leeds, not long ago, there was quite a bit of a resurfacing done near the grammar school with innovative material, and we're keeping an eye on that to see how that's performing. So that's an ongoing process, but there is no silver bullet. In terms of, maybe I can then pass on to colleagues who perhaps can answer the disparity. I think that will come down to previous approach and now our approach, in terms of making sure that the worst conditioned road is dealt with in an appropriate manner first. And over a city the size of Leeds, with different wards and different characteristics in terms of traffic flows, there will be variations, but hopefully over time, I suspect we will start to see some of these gaps narrow, but I'll let colleagues who might have more information.
The way that the backlog's calculated is, as I explained earlier, it's on the length of the red, the high amber, the low amber, and the green. So that gives you the total backlog. What we did a couple of years ago, we tried to give an indicative indication of what the backlog was on a ward by ward basis. So in each ward, you've got a length of green, high amber, low amber, and red. Based on the budgets that we get for the local road maintenance, which is circa 10 million works, we know that we deliver approximately 132 schemes per annum. So that equates to about 4 streets per ward. So if you divide the number of streets that are in a poor condition by 4, you get an indicative backlog for that ward. So that's how those years are calculated. And so it does give that disparity between one ward and another. But what we also do is we create a graph of all the network, and we split it on a ward by ward basis, and we've got a length of red, amber, and green on a bar chart, and no ward has less than 50% in green. and there's only a couple of wards that have got more than 10% in red. So what we try and do is focus on those wards to bring them up. But several years ago, I think it was 2015-16, where the budget was divided up between the 33 wards and you all got an equal amount, it was seen to be better spent on the roads of greatest need. So basically, you could have one ward that's got 50 streets in the red band, and so divided by 4, that's going to take you X number of years. You could have another ward that's only got 15, 16 divided by 4. It's going to be a heck of a lot less. But it doesn't mean to say that those 16 in the red band are going to get done before those 50, because then you start taking into all the account of that both require work doing, and they both require work doing now, but you've got to take into the account the hierarchy, the public complaints, the safety reports and everything else. So while it's an indicative, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take 50 years to get Armley back up to speed, or 8 years for Harewood. The thing is, when we did that, and if you look at the programmes, Harewood has had very little reconstruction work done in the ward over the last few years because of the nature of it, that it's mainly rural with a few villages here and there. What you'll find is that Harewood might have 20 schemes on the list this year, but they're all preventative schemes. So they're significantly cheaper, more cost effective. Cheaper doesn't necessarily mean nasty. It just means that it's the right treatment at the right time. And so it will get a lot longer length of improvement for the money that we spend in Harewood, rather than somewhere, say, Headingley, where the Yorkstone cabs, Yorkstone flags, it costs us a lot of money, and therefore, we're spending 3 times as much in that ward than we are in Harewood, but the length of improvement is a lot less than one of the wards. So it's just how it equates out, because sometimes you can make figures say anything. It was just that the information that was provided was to give an indicative that basically we're not getting enough money, we're doing the best with the money that we've got, and at the current rate of budget that we've got, it's likely to take us 14 years to get your streets back up into good condition. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Did you want to come back in briefly? Yeah, thank you.
I just want to thank officers for that answer. I'm glad I don't have to explain it, but can I just get this financing thing right? Councillor Pryor said that in broad terms we were spending the same amount of money in inflation comparison than we were 15 years ago. But if Network North are funding £2 million of it, that surely means that the city is spending less. And the second point was, could you just confirm to me that the total pothole repair budget has gone down from 7.5 million to 5 million in 14 years?
So yes, I describe them as comparable rather than the same. I think there's a slight semantic difference there. Yes, it means you're absolutely right. There is a slight reduction in funding there, but I think we have to look at that in the context of where council funding has been these past 14 years. Central government funding has gone from £450 million a year to £33 million a year from central government. So for there only to be a reduction of that size, I think it demonstrates how much this has been protected compared to, and how much of a priority has this been for the council. We're spending less on everything. I don't think there's any kind of way of presenting council finances that shows that we've been well served by national government as a local authority over these past 14 years. So to even have protected it to this extent, I think demonstrates the council's priority in this area.
Thanks, folks. There's 4 of us that want to ask questions. So if we can be relatively brief so we can get everyone's questions in, that would be ideal. Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. I I have been working in the technology sector for the last 30 years, and we have this concept of right first time. So I wanted to just ask a couple of questions actually, about potholes and how many times they need refilling before permanent structures are put in place, and whether you've got any good data points on that. And I think that's quite important because you mentioned public perception, and I think sometimes there is a public perception that the patching work is not good enough and often requires a regular rework, and the public can often see that as wasted money. So if you've got any data points on that, I think that would be super useful. The other thing I wanted to ask was, I've read the report a couple of times, and given, I mean, from what I can see, the funding levels you have at the moment are at the peak and they're due to decline for the next few years. But I couldn't clearly see what the document is suggesting in terms of your actual strategy to manage that. I think the document has got lots of really helpful information, shows a really good as-is picture today, but I can't really get a feel for what your strategy and approach is over the next few years. And lastly, because I work in technology, obviously I'm really interested in your mention of AI in terms of future preventative maintenance. That's it. Thank you.
I'll try and be succinct and try and cover off a couple of these, but I might need a bit of support. The right first time point is one that we get very often, and it's one that we are reviewing. It's a balance, always a balance for us, because of the number of potholes that we have reported to us. We need to make the dangerous ones safe as soon as possible. Ideally, we would like to go out and do the proper full permanent job there and then, but the scale of the reports, as highlighted in the report, means that on occasions we will have to go out and put a safe repair in. That means we will have to revisit again, so I suspect, depending on the characteristics of the road and the traffic flows and the type of vehicles that are going over it. And that is something that Simon and the team are looking at to see if there is a way, using maybe AI, innovative materials and machines, we can try and stop that. But that's a process that is ongoing. I don't know whether we've got any data points, but maybe colleagues can chip in there. In terms of a strategy going forward, what we're talking about here, I mentioned Network North, and I'm just playing a very straight bat here in terms of what's been said to us by the previous government. There were significant funds that were on the horizon coming our way, or to all authorities, but the details around that were never confirmed, although you can see Network North, there was bits that were starting to come through. Obviously, post-general election, we wait to see what the King's Speech contains today to see where that lies, because that will impact some of these numbers quite considerably if that is retained. But as I sit here, I just simply don't know. If it doesn't come through, that managed decline process strategy will continue. It may just get more significant, and that's just reality. The cost of the repairs, inflation, lack of funding will mean that the backlog will get bigger. The colleagues want to come back on AI?
Yeah, AI is very exciting in our ways at this moment in time. We've been trialing for the last, well, not trialing because we're using it now, for the last 2 years. So we're working with a company called Versala. They're in 35 countries across the world, and they're doing an awful lot of work with the AI technology. Basically, it's a mobile phone that we can put in a holder on the windscreen of a vehicle. So when we do the safety inspections, we place it on the dashboard and we record the video. So it gives us actual footage of the condition of the road. The technology within the, all they do is press one button, start recording. When they finish the route, they press stop. When they walk into the house at the end of the day, it downloads it straight onto the system. We've got video reviews of exactly what they've done. The technology within there is clever enough to pick up something like 42 different types of defects within the highway, because that's what they've taught it, crazing, cracking, rutting, or edge defects. and that. So that will give it a ranking, and it gives you a red, amber, green score. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're looking at the red, amber, green scores and matching it to what our engineers are saying out on site. There was a little bit of difference, so you can tweak some of the scorings and the weightings for the different types of defects. And we've got it to about a 75% match at this moment in time. We're hoping to increase that. What that will mean is that as our safety inspectors carry out the safety inspections, then that will be able to give us a red, amber, green alert. So when my engineers go out to have a look at streets, instead of having to inspect every street, if AI's told us it's a green street, there's no point me wasting my time sending my engineers out there. Let's just direct the engineers to the reds, confirm that the reds, and let's see what, with all the scorings and all the mechanisms, the prioritisation on there. The system's clever enough to pick up road markings, so it gives you 25%, 50%, 75%. Whether it's disappeared or not, so we can pick up all the road markings. It'll pick every single road sign up, so you can go onto the highway code book, click a sign, and it'll tell you exactly where those signs are located. If you do a driven survey and that sign's missing from one survey to the next, it will highlight it saying that that sign's down. They can get out and have a look. Other authorities have used it, they've picked up, because when they do a Section 38 development, they're allowed to put signs on, say, new development here, and they pay for that privilege, but they're only allowed to do it for so many months. One authority went round, picked all the signs up and says, you've had these signs out for a lot longer, we're charging you rent for them now, and put a bill in. So there's lots of things they can do. The latest one that they're just working on is the potholes. It's very difficult, this pothole, because it's defining that hole and the depth and the parameters. They're actually working with 5 authorities at the moment. I went on a conversation on Monday afternoon to discuss Leeds getting on that trial and working with them to getting more details. So as the guys go around, we have a driver and an observer. The observer's got a little press button. It can press a button. It'll time and date stamp that thing, and it'll say pothole. That instantly goes to the crew. They'll have a tablet. It'll come up on theirs, and it will say, this is a Cat 1, therefore these are all your Cat 1s, these are what you need to do in there. So there's lots of different initiatives, and just touching sort of on AI, but initiatives, what Councillor Buckley raised with regards to, patching, that we've looked at lots of initiatives of how to do potholes. We've used one called a jet patcher, which is basically, it's like a great big boom that comes out the back of the wagon, and it sprays bitumen at high velocity and does lots of patches. We've done lots of initiatives like that, and whilst they're sold on paper and you watch the YouTube videos, they look absolutely fantastic, but it's making it economically viable, and you've got to have sufficient number of potholes to be able to make that, because we charge X pounds and this machine costs £1,000 a day, so we'd need to do 200 potholes a day. Well, when you're going in little streets and little cul-de-sacs, and this is a massive one, this is a machine that's used on American roads, and that you can just go down one patch after another. So there is initiatives out there. We are looking at them, but it's got to be right for Leeds, and it's got to be cost effective, value for money. With regards to potholes, we don't really have any, I forget how you phrased it, how many times it's repaired. So this indicative, because generally what we find is it's not the same pothole. It's a road starts to deteriorate, it crazes and it cracks, water gets in, pothole forms. We go out and repair that. What happens is that pothole's still there and it's still repaired. It's the adjacent bit, it's next to it. This, then, other. We do have a record. Obviously, we log every pothole against every street. So we've got an indicative list of which streets have been potholed the most. But at the moment, potholes are logged against a street rather than a section. So Harrogate Road will probably come to the top of the list with 115 potholes, but it's 6 miles long. We need to tie that down. Is it 50 potholes in one location, or is it 50 potholes, one every 5 yards? With the new system that we're going to, we will have that information. So we're getting better. If data is key in asset management, and we're getting there. Thank you.
Is it possible just to add something to that as well? Because I think we touched on that we've got this 5-year modernisation project of the highway services. And as part of that, clearly we want to be at the forefront of innovation and technology. And a couple of years ago, we became a member of the Leeds Local Council's Road Innovation Group. That's a national group, and quite often what that enables councils to do is, rather than each one bring it in and trial it, we can share that knowledge and experience across different councils, and that's something that we're definitely looking to introduce this year. And furthermore, as we've mentioned, we are aware that we need to change the strategy of how we look to do the pothole repairs, and we've got a project that we've commenced this year, and I think one of the outcomes will be that we will move with more technology and innovative plan and do more permanent patching rather than keep going back to some of these temporary sites. But it's balancing up to do a permanent repair. It's more invasive, it's more costly versus going back to a same location. And again, hoping that the AI will be able to help us see clearly where there's sections of the highway that have got multiple potholes forming in small areas, so we can go in and, rather than do 8 repairs over a year, that we'll be able to go in and do one sort of bigger patch repair. So it's something that we're working on currently, and hopefully within the next sort of 10-12 months we'll be able to change that focus on how we do that and approach that repair.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, and again, I'm mindful of time, so if we can be as concise as possible, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I'll try and be brief and as brief as I can. As Gary knows, I love this topic when we go through it. So in the same way, working in tech, tech has that saying of move fast and break things. I don't think we need to break any more things on the roads, because it seems like enough of them are broken at the moment. I'm really interested in the insurance claims that go in, and when insurance claims go in, which budget do they come from? Do they come from the council's legal budget, or do they start to come from the council's highways budget?
I think we might have to come back to you on that one. I don't think it's highways. But
neither do I.
It's not a question that I've been asked before. It's been more about process, and which we've tried to articulate there. So maybe that's something we need to just put in the executive board.
Helpfully, Councillor Cooper's just attended the table, so I think she might want to come in on that.
Bring in reinforcements. Happy.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Exec Board Member for Resources. And just to try to be helpful, Councillor Robinson, to answer. Who knew I was sat over there waiting for my item to come on? Just to be try to be helpful in terms of that. There is a central fund that deals with any kind of insurance claims through the Strategy and Resources Directorate through Finance. At some point, it will be reallocated to the departments in terms of the cost, but there is a pot that centrally deals with those things. Just to be helpful, Chair. Thank you.
You're always helpful, Councillor Cooper. And I think part of the challenge there is that how, as Gary's almost identified, how highways see when the insurance claim goes in that somebody's hit a pothole, what's having an impact on that department. It can be difficult for the department to see if that spend that they're delivering on potholes is being seen in terms of a drop in terms of the claims that are coming in. A second question for the officers then, is it right that when somebody puts a claim in against the council and that is going through, that because there is a pothole that they have hit, that their insurance premiums go up?
Again, I think that would be a question for the insurance companies to answer rather than highways officers. Going back to your first comment, we as a service do monitor the number of claims that are coming in on a monthly basis. We have a monitoring process that tracks these, and I think you can see over the years that our firm but fair approach in conjunction with the insurance section has yielded benefits, where if you go back to 2010-11, perhaps a different approach was in play. Now we have this firm but fair approach. Although in recent years, the last 12 months or so, you can see the uplift. But in terms of that specific question, I don't think that's a matter for an insurance company to assess, I would say.
It's probably worth us, if I take and if you've got any further questions around insurance, if I take those in email from you, and then it would be worth me contacting Councillor Khan in charge, who chairs the other scrutiny board, because it's probably more within their remit as well to be able to really get the answers that you'd want, and they can put that on their work programme if that's what they choose.
That is absolutely fine. I'm very happy to do that. And as we are not allowed to talk about specific sites, I can't really give reference to them, but I can in an email. So that is absolutely fine, Chair, on that front. The next question is on Network North funding. So the Network North funding, we've heard, amounts to about 8% of repairs that's there. And we've not got any, I just want to confirm with officers that there's no guarantee, though it was in a previous government's budget, but there's no guarantee that we've had to date that that Network North funding will continue.
My recollection is that prior to the general election, we were waiting and we were pushing for dates when that Network North funding was going to be made available to WICA to be distributed to district councils, because it had been indicatively apportioned for a financial year some years away, and there was an ongoing debate about trying to bring it forward just because of the state of roads nationally, not just in Leeds. And there was some talk about bringing it a couple of years forward, but in terms of definitive proposals, no, there weren't any before the general election, and clearly we're waiting post.
Chair, on that, that's absolutely fine, Chair. On that, I think perhaps this scrutiny board wants to consider whether we write to Treasury and should be suggesting that, given 8% is a significant amount and it impacts the forward planning of departments, whether we want to flag that we want some guarantees around that. The last question then is on street scarring. Utility companies will regularly come out and do works in the area. They'll do a job where they patch it up, and it will take a significant length of time for them to come back and repair it. So Gary talked about Yorkshire Flagstone. It might have been Tony, sorry, that talked about Yorkshire Flagstone in areas, and residents across Leeds have to put up with that. What are we doing to hold utilities companies more to account that when they do repairs, it's done to the appropriate standards it was before, rather than some street scarring?
Councillor Pryor, I saw you put your hand up for the first one.
It was just a very brief point. It's 8.2% when you exclude the revenue. When you include the revenue that Leeds City Council funds, it's 5.9%.
In highways, we have a network management team that carry out a percentage inspection of such work, and if there are faults found, they issue a notice to require repairs to be undertaken, and if they're not, the company will be fined accordingly. And that is a rigorous process, but we are only able to do a certain percentage of inspections of such works, and so we don't get round every bit of utility work, which would be a massive task anyway, given the scale of the works that take place across Leeds on an annual basis. But the answer simply is that we have a network management team and we have inspectors that do go around, and particularly if councillors let us know or the residents let us know of particular issues, we will redirect our inspectors to have a look and, if necessary, fine.
Question, Chair. I think there's probably a better way that we get the public involved in that process as to holding those utilities companies to account.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Dye.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions in terms of future planning, really, and whether the needs of patching up potholes are going to increase or reduce. And the first one relates to a couple of things that were in the report that are behind the causes of potholes. One to do with excess rainfall and the other one to do with freeze-thaw effects. And it looks like we're likely to have a climate with increased rainfall, but with warmer temperatures. So are you able to say which of those has a greater effect? Is there data around that? Because that might determine whether we're likely to face an increasingly worsening or improving picture. And then the other one relates to traffic on the roads. We're trying to encourage people to leave cars at home and to use more public transport. There's a graph, I think it's on page 19 of vehicles, and clearly that has an effect on the roads as well. Is there data around whether heavier vehicles like buses are better or worse? Because if we take a lot of cars on the road and we put off the road and we put people in buses, it on the face of it, it seems to be a good thing, but is there data around whether it is in terms of the road surface? Thank you.
Okay, I'll start, try and be succinct, but if colleagues want to add succinctly, please do. I think in terms of the climate change one, sort of winter freeze thaw versus very wet, seemingly permanently, as it has been over the last 12 months, it's probably too early to call. Certainly in my time here, I remember bad winters, and then also in the spring it being, you know, a similar situation in terms of number of potholes and complaints about the condition. So it'll depend on the severity of the winter and that freeze thaw action. But this prolonged period of wet weather since seemingly June, July last year, when we had that nice period, it seems to have rained ever since, and it's you can see its impact, particularly on the surfacing. And this is something that colleagues are looking at. They call it delamination of the surfacing away from the layers underneath that's occurring. So not necessarily potholes, but delamination of the surface, which looks awful, is uncomfortable to drive on, but structurally it's probably not an issue, whereas some potholes, because of their depth, are structurally a problem to us. So climate change in all its facets across a wide range of services is an issue that we are, we as a highway authority across the country are trying to deal with as well and plan for. In terms of HGVs and buses, yes, you can just look at motorway lanes as well, can't you? Where if you look on the inside lane, you can see where predominantly the HGVs are, those tend to deform quite quickly as opposed to the other lanes where there are mainly cars. So it could be the same on some of our roads. We try and design the actual scheme to make sure that it can take its intended use. So in the city centre, for example, where there's going to be lots of impact by buses, we will try and have a design that is suitable for that, would be my answer. It will be a balance in terms of taking into account the whole traffic flow. So if you do reduce the cars considerably, and you may just have one or two more HGVs, we should be okay. So horses for courses is probably what I would say.
Lovely, thank you. I also had some questions, but rather than letting this overrun too far, I am going to move on to the potential recommendations for a scrutiny statement. And through that, because obviously we've worked on what potential recommendations there are, it kind of picks up a bunch of my questions anyway. So it also helpfully picks up a lot of the things that have been brought up during the meeting as well. So the recommendations that we could include, and if we can just have either a bit of a nod or if anyone's got any comments, but again, brevity is important. Whether we want to look at requesting a change in approach, or moving towards a change in approach or a shift towards increasing the proportion of work and resources being focused on permanent patching, which would obviously, it is a more effective in terms of what Councillor Layton was saying, do things once. Obviously, we know that it's far more expensive, but whether that's something that we want to put our weight behind as a scrutiny board. And then also we need to think perhaps about how we measure progress on that. Is that something that we want to include? Yeah, quite content with that as an option. Good. Communication is another thing that would be good for us to potentially include. And I think part of the issue for me, certainly in ward, is when the temporary fixes are done, there's a real lack of clarity from residents over the fact that's being done for a reason as opposed to a permanent patch, and actually looking at the communication strategy around our potholes, because this report, and I would have highlighted it if I'd had enough time, has loads of really good stuff in it. Like compared to national, we are doing really well. I go down south a lot to see my family, well, relatively a lot. And the potholes down there, there's roads you just don't even drive on because it's almost one pothole instead of a road. And yeah, I think actually there is a communications element that we need to be getting that good news story out a little more. So I'd quite like to include that myself as well to aid residents' understanding. It came up around policing repairs by third parties. A lot of the issues around that come nationally with us not having strong enough powers. So whether there's something we want to include asking for those to be strengthened by the new government. Looking at how we could use what we've got or in-house services to have quick wins. So things like improving our white lining and getting maybe an internal pothole team that just goes from ward to ward and just sort of in a similar way to they were talking about with the machine, but without a machine to focus on small areas and just get a majority of stuff done. I'm not sure if that's something people would like to include. Yeah. Okay, good. Councillor Thompson has messaged about waterlogged rural roads and the significant damage that does around active travel. And I'm really happy to include something around our drainage, as it's really clear from here the impact of weathering. And then my final suggestion is making sure that we include in the statement a request that we monitor the changes to journeys post-COVID. Actually, are people using our main arterial routes to come into town, or are we making more journeys within? And is our maintenance strategy being amended based on that fact or that perceived fact? It may not be a fact. That's why we would monitor it. Is there any of those that anyone aren't happy with? No? Councillor Scopes, was that a comment?
Yes, Chair, thanks for those. Just a couple of other suggestions. So the first one, based on comments made from two councillors, I think it's worth saying that we, so I support the comments about the AI and using technology. So I think there'd be something around supporting, keeping pushing that. Yeah, and I can see members nodding, so hopefully you'll accept that, Chair. And then the other one, which might be more difficult, I think it's also, from my perspective, I think it'd be interesting to look at what can be done to make the situation between wards fairer. I note the comments that around if you get persistent complainers in your ward, it seems like that's one of the factors that might mean that you get your road fixed quicker. And I think there's certain areas within my ward where there's a lot of apathy or reluctance to report, and you see that in reporting a crime or any other situation. So just a challenge to say, look, just because there's not individuals complaining, it doesn't mean that individuals aren't happy. And so if there's a red road, it should be prioritised just the same, whether or not 10 residents on the street complain about it, Chair. Thank you.
I'm happy to add those. Anyone not happy?
Separate question, Chair. It was just simply, are we not going to mention the reduction in spending?
As in the reduction in government spending over 14 years?
No. The reduction in the spend by the council.
We could do. I'm happy to include it if you'd like. Yeah, no worries. Councillor Robinson?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think probably you can align it with the communications point that you said, which is around this greater transparency. So whether this is online mapping tools that the public can get involved with, whether it's actually a way of them reporting it far easier to know where we are in that process. I think getting the public involved is what will help with the apathy argument. The second actually is the point I raised about the Northern Networks, which is clarity from the government on multi-year funding and what is going to happen with Northern Networks, because clearly that funding has a significant impact for this council and many others, and we should clarify, I think, that position.
I think on that second point, it would be worth the idea of writing direct rather than that being included in the scrutiny statement. So I'm happy to do that as two separate but linked actions. Excellent. So if we're all happy with that, what I'll do, because this is obviously going to exec board relatively soon, is we'll write it. It'll be cleared through me. I will provide it via email once it's all cleared and sent off. If people are happy to just trust that I'm not going to put anything completely left field in. How happy are we? Okay, folks. Lovely. In which case, we will move on to agenda item number 8, our community asset transfer policy. And we'll just give a moment for officers to change over. Lovely. Thank you very much. We're all in place. So this is a updated community asset transfer policy. It's another brilliant opportunity for us to do some pre-decision scrutiny. It's going to executive board next week, and it's an opportunity for us to make comments that Councillor Cooper can then take with her to that discussion. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves, please?
Morning again. I'm on the right item this time, Chair. Thank you. And thanks for taking the late updated paper on this matter as well. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Executive Board Member for Resources.
Morning. Mark Mills, Head of Asset Management.
And good morning, Angela Barnacle, Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration.
Thank you. If you'd like to move straight into your presentation, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen. So as Councillor Bithell has said, this is, and you've had a report that was circulated yesterday, which is the Executive Board report that's going to be considered on the 24th of July, which is a week's time. So forgive me if some of you have seen a version of this presentation previously through the consultation that we undertook with ward members. But I think the purpose of today is for us for me to really just run through the purpose of the work that's been ongoing, what the revised policy now includes, and then take comments, questions, etc. So I think to start with, it's probably just worth outlining a little bit of background about community asset transfers. So they were formally introduced, I suppose, in the Localism Acts in 2011. However, I think as an authority, we've probably done something along the lines of community asset transfer in the earlier years than that, primarily around less than best leases to community organisations. So it wasn't something that we weren't unfamiliar value with. And it's obviously the transfer, including all management, maintenance responsibilities of land and property assets to community organisations for the continued benefits and use by the community. In response to the Localism Act, the council introduced its own community asset transfer policy in 2012, and it hasn't been reviewed since that date. So obviously, and I'll come on to a few of the things that we've seen over those years, but that's obviously led us to need to review the policy now. Also really worth making clear that assets of community value and community asset transfer are two very different aspects of the Localism Act. So assets of community value is a community right to bid process effectively, through which local community organisations that are constituted can put forward properties which are owned by any individual owner that are in community use. They can put them forward for to be included on the asset of community value register, which is maintained by the council, so that if that property was to come forward for disposal, they would have an opportunity to be able to bring a proposal and a bid together for that property at market value, and that to be considered by the vendor of the property. So it just gives a period of exclusivity, I suppose, for them to be able to bring a proposal forward. Community asset transfer is very much a tool used by the public sector around the transfer of assets. Again, not necessarily on a less than best basis, but the transfer of assets for community use and to continue that community delivery. So I've got a number of slides. I'm going to quickly whip through some of them and go into more detail in others. So I think everyone is probably well aware of the benefits of that community asset transfer brings in terms of that continued use of much loved community assets by those local communities, and to support the continued delivery of services in those communities. I think one of the key things is the bottom point there, though, in that obviously as the council's funding is reduced over the recent years, the ability for community organisations to be able to obtain and bid into other grant funding it has remained, albeit still very challenging environment, and so therefore there's an opportunity for community organisations to bring forward investment into buildings that the council's otherwise not able to do. I think it's worth just saying that a lot of asset transfers, it's not a panacea, let's say. It's about the transfer of liability in many cases. Buildings, property is a liability, and particularly the condition of some of the buildings that we have within the council, again, due to our ability to properly invest and so on. So therefore, there has to be a really strong business case that recognises some of those challenges and identifies ways in which funding and the delivery of improvements to those properties can be brought about. It's also worth saying that from our experience, the successful transfers are all around where you've got a really well-structured, well-resourced community organisation, again, recognising the challenges that can bring. But also that there's a realistic proposal at play that actually really benefits the local community, and it's about ensuring there's that buy-in from the community in order to be able to bring forward those transfers. Again, I think many people around the table can probably point to community asset transfers that have taken place, and this is the list of the formal community asset transfers that we've entered into since the Localism Act came into being. And they range in size from community centres right through to things like Eden Town Hall and Bramley Baths, which, as you will appreciate, are very challenging buildings given their age, but also the nature of the services, facilities that are delivered within those properties. So I've already touched on some of the challenges that we've seen over the course of the last 12 years or so in bringing forward community asset transfers. And I think it's probably just worth us talking through those in a little bit more detail. So I think the key thing, as I've said before, is that there's a real focus around community services and the need for those facilities to be used by communities. Clearly, that underpins the usage, the income generation, etc. If the community organisation can really demonstrate that they've got the ability to fully utilise the building, I think that point around the complexity of buildings and that needing to be recognised by as part of the business case development and so on is really key. And I think that comes back to the resource point. And within the council, you know, we don't have the resource to be able to fully support the organisations, but equally, community organisations themselves are often formed to deliver certain activities. Taking on a building is a massive step beyond what a lot of the organisations are probably formed to do. So, you know, really recognising that. And there are organisations that support community organisations such as Locality. But again, that comes at a cost. They can find pots of grant funding that can be accessed. But nevertheless, I think it's really key to have that support from an organisation or organisations who've been through the process, because we try not to make it bureaucratic, but by the very nature and the complexity of what people are taking on, we as a council have to be aware and ensure that we do the due diligence so that we're not exposing community organisations to undue stress and risk. I think I've touched on already the asset condition, and I think more recently there's been legislative changes which require any commercially let property, which is a community asset transfer falls into that category, to meet a minimum energy performance rating. Now that's currently set at an E. But the likelihood is that while the timescales haven't been fully defined, the likelihood is that's going to increase to a B. And given the nature of the buildings that may become available and already have become available and being transferred, again, that's a challenge, and one that business cases need to reflect, given the limited ability for us to be able to step in as a council. And then I think the final 2 points there have probably already been covered around the capacity and financial challenge that the council has. So I think that all sets the tone for why we're refreshing the policy to really provide a more accessible and understandable policy for communities to be able to work with, but really recognising the challenges and the experiences we've seen over the last 12 years from both successful transfers, but also the number of unsuccessful transfers or transfers that haven't really progressed for one reason or another. And you know, we've had many organisations come to us expressing an interest in community asset transfer and then recognising the challenges that I've talked about and them not coming forward. So and while we can't address all of those challenges in a policy document that we're bringing forward now, I think it's about recognising where we can make some change to aid the process that we do so. So in terms of the proposed changes to the policy, I think first of all, and I'll come on to the consultation we've undertaken, but we have been speaking to the Leeds Community Anchors Network, and obviously we've also spoken to ward members as well around their views. But I think one of the key things that has come through is around a lack of visibility of properties that may be suitable for community asset transfer. So the first thing is that we're proposing that where we do have properties that may be suitable and where we know that there might be interest and capacity to bring forward a community asset transfer, that we bring together a list of properties, very similar to the way that we do with the capital receipt programme, so that it's really transparent that we've got support, I suppose, to be able to progress discussions around those transfers. Really clear though that it won't be a list that a property ends up on and remains on. If things don't progress, if community organisations don't come forward, then clearly what we don't want to be doing is just sitting on a vacant property. So we would then have to reassess our options with that building. I think the second point is that where we do have existing community organisations in buildings that effectively are the main organisation in the building, we'd look to see whether there's a potential to undertake transfers to them in the first instance. And I think that's something that was really missing in the last policy and probably caused a little bit of ambiguity as to why we try to do things with some organisations and not others. I think, though, to be clear, where there isn't a really clear organisation, but we do still think there's an opportunity for community asset transfer, they will be advertised, and that there'll be a really clear process to be undertaken, a submission form to be completed, and we'll have some really clear timescales for turning round a shortlisting approach or seeking those business cases. I think we will still retain that opportunity for organisations to come forward with proposals for community asset transfers and suggest buildings. But I'll come on to some of the considerations around that in a second, because clearly not every building is suitable for community asset transfer. And I think the big one is the last point there, which a lot of the comments that we've received and I suppose feedback from organisations who have been through community asset transfer is that the legal process is quite daunting, quite resource intensive. And in some ways that is driven by the submissions that we receive from organisations, because they want a specific legal approach taken or specific clauses in leases. But I don't think it's the best use of anyone's resources. So what we're proposing is a standard heads of terms lease document, where we will put that out and make that very clear so that organisations can become comfortable with that and understand the context within which they're putting proposals forward. So the point around how we come up with a list of what properties are suitable is really important, particularly given the various hats the council wears, but also in the financial position. So when a property becomes vacant, a service leaves a property, for instance, we clearly need to consider whether there's an alternative service requirement, that whether the council has its own requirement for property in the first instance, or whether there's a priority programme such as council housing growth, which could benefit from the use of that property. I think in terms of the council's financial position at this point in time, clearly we've got to think about that capital receipt requirement, but I think it's recognising that the policy isn't just for the next 2-3 years. We intend it to be longer term. So while that's clearly a requirement now and a concentration for us now, the context may well change over the lifetime of the policy. I've already spoken about how we might deliver council housing growth, for instance, but there's the wider way in which sites and properties can support housing and economic growth. I've spoken about alternative service need, but equally whether there's a genuine case for a community asset transfer to be able to provide that support to the local community, and so I suppose how realistic would it be to be able to form a really strong business case. The service history or the historic use of the asset is a really key one, and we've this rolls over from the 2012 policy, but effectively for a building to be considered to be a community asset transfer, it needs to have had a community facing use or a community use in the immediate years prior to that. So that is we obviously have a diverse range of properties as a council, and so a depot or an office isn't something that would naturally be a community asset transfer in accordance with that that requirement. And then I think again the big thing is around the asset condition and its ability to meet the energy performance requirements. Some of our buildings are of a construction and developed at a time when there wasn't such consideration around sustainability. And therefore, it might be incredibly difficult to be able to achieve some of the future requirements around energy performance ratings with some properties. And while that's regrettable, ultimately we've got to be able to deliver these within the context of the legislation which is in place. So that's a key consideration really. And again, coming back to my point I raised earlier about buildings or not putting community organisations under stress, it's one of the key things we've got to think about. So we're almost there. Just in terms of consultation engagement, I've referenced the discussions we've had with the LCAN and ward members. We held an all ward member session on the 25th of June, which was I think attended by around 40 members ultimately. And I think I'll just come on to some of the findings through that, but I think for us as officers and being able to bring the policy to life and bring it forward, I think one of the key things is about understanding where that capacity is within the city and where there is that genuine interest and ability to deliver a community asset transfer. Because what we don't want to be doing is identifying buildings that are potentially suitable but in the wrong locations. So that's going to be a key thing. And then continuing that, the key thing being that we want to continue that engagement with organisations moving forward. So continuing to learn lessons. I think in terms of the consultation responses we received, I think there was broad support for the proactive approach that we're setting out, as well as acknowledgement around the challenges. I think one of the comments was raised around learning a little bit more from organisations that have been through the process already. And I think what we're proposing is to again hold potentially an all ward member session and bring some organisations together to talk about their experiences, good, bad, indifferent, and hopefully improve understanding of what that looks like from a community perspective. And then it's probably worth referencing that I think from the community there was probably a desire from the LCAN network, probably a desire to be more actively involved in identifying the list of community asset transfers. But I think through the discussions we've had, don't know why that is. There's a broad understanding that clearly we have all those other pressures that I've talked about already, and that may not set the right context for us, but to be able to have those conversations. So in terms of next steps, we've talked about it going to exec board. No, it's still muted. Subject to approval of the executive board, we will look to improve to bring forward a list of community asset transfer potentials and opportunities, but that will be in line with all the wider considerations with services around their use of properties, and that will be something else that would come back to executive board. And I think the final point is we're never going to get this right and perfect, and I think everyone's going to have a view. So we will continually learn around the process, and while the policy will be obviously guiding what we do, the way in which we use that policy and apply it, we will continually learn and work with organisations to refine.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It's possibly worth adding that as well as the people that attended the briefing, a bunch of us also read the slides. So I think you probably can even tally up even more engagement than just those that were there. I'm going to open it for 10 minutes of discussion, with the end result being Councillor Cooper knowing our thoughts. And I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and do mine first because I missed out on the last item. So I have a couple of questions and a few comments. Is it still the case that third sector organisations can't get funding to improve the EPC before they get the lease, and they can't get the lease unless the EPC is at the correct level? I wonder, with the amazing partnership working we do in the city around our third sector organisations, whether we've looked at speaking to third sector leads, voluntary action leads, any of those around what they can put in terms of programs to support organisations, or whether actually there's a need for a new organisation to support CAP like moving forward. With the equality and diversity linked papers, it said there was no impact on specific groups, and I just wondered if that could be revisited at some point, because with my sort of LGBT champion hat on, we are a much less geographical community, and obviously a building is geographical. We tend to have far fewer or far less capacity with community activists, and we also like the National Lottery comes back to us, using them as an example, and is really clear that they do not get and do not give out enough grant funding to LGBT communities. So actually, with that being a key factor for the policy, actually we're less likely to be able to get that. So it might just be worth doing a little bit more on that if possible, moving when it comes moving forward. In terms of the policy making the criteria clearer, I think it's brilliant, and I just wonder what comms is going out around that. And then also for councillors, what would be really helpful is a FAQ main pitfalls document. In the policy, there's basically a list of really helpful bullet points, but they almost need to be extracted and just sent so that when a community organisation comes to us, we can be like, if these are going to be your problems, if you don't meet them, great, then we'll move forward. And then I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll quickly run through those. So I suppose starting at the end, which was that FAQs, yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. So something we'll bring together. And in terms of the wider comms, we've certainly identified the need to do that, and equally use ward members and the wider networks to be able to get the message out there. So in terms of going back to the first point, which is around the investment into the buildings and the energy performance side, I think this is where there is grant funding available out there generally to be able to do some of that work. And certainly in terms of the engagement that organisations might have with organisations such as locality, that can help shape it. I think one of what you may have been getting at, Councillor Bithell, is in the past we've had this dilemma about how you get to the point of a lease when you don't meet the energy performance requirements. I think and we've worked this through as part of thinking about the standard documentation. We would look to enter into an agreement to lease effectively, which would allow the organisation that opportunity to be able to deliver the investment, and then with the assurance that they're then able to enter into the lease upon completion of that work. So hopefully that addresses that point. In terms of support from organisations, I've already referenced locality. I think we have though been discussing, and voluntary action leads have been part of the discussions we've had with the Leeds Community Anchor Network, and we have discussed with them about what they may be able to bring to the table to be able to provide that help and support. And I think obviously LCAN is a collection of many organisations, so we've been speaking to a small group of representatives, but I think there was a feeling that they would be able to bring some of that support, or at least linking up with organisations that can help. So I think again, it's probably more about us signposting a number of directions rather than us having all of the answers. But yeah, we will certainly do that. And in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion, you're right. It does say that there's no impact in the paper. I think that's recognising that from a policy perspective, there probably isn't. The requirement though, or the importance comes when we start talking about the buildings, because they are then specific to those communities, and that does then have some of those impacts that you referenced. So that I think that consideration will come through as part of that next stage of building identification.
And just to add to that point, Chair, in terms of that really important point about support for organisations, we've looked at that in two ways. One is that peer support. So those really good community groups have already gone through this and built that capacity. So how can we do that peer-to-peer learning? And then the second is they will need some professional advisory here. You know, some of these terms are quite daunting, etc. And we've thought about how do we use funds such as the UK SPF, you know, hopefully with the potential to extend that to a further year, so that there could be a pot within communities that could help fund to build that capacity within a certain community group, because I think that's been a real barrier to date, certainly when we can't advise for third parties as well.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time, so I'll move on, but I might come back to you with the equality and diversity stuff. Okay, so we've got Councillor Thompson next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really welcome this report. We have one example of a successful community asset transfer in our ward and another nearby, which is great. And I was going to ask about peer support, but you've already covered that. That's really encouraging. And especially the standardising and simplifying of the process, because being aware of other organisations who are looking into this and the time it's taken them just to put the business case together and all the other bits, anything we can do to simplify that is absolutely welcome. One concern I do have is, so the one in our ward particularly, they keep coming back to the community committee for funding, for windows, for doors. How can we support those organisations or signpost them to access the widest possible range of funding to be able to maintain their assets and grow what they're doing? It's not that we don't want to help them, but we've got very limited funds, and if others are joining the network, then it's going to become a greater challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's a really critical point. And certainly, as we are engaging with community groups, we're very clear about the condition of the building and the liabilities they're taking on at that point. That's where I think organisations such as Locality are really important, because they're a national wide infrastructure and able to draw and learn what's coming through the new policies, etc. So I think working with our ABCD team in adults has been really important to make sure that we are creating a better front door for people to come in so that we can signpost them as well. And I think, you know, the LCAN network has been incredibly important to that. I don't think we're going to have a solid answer very quickly on this, primarily because policies change quite rapidly, and secondly, the community groups are changing as well quite rapidly. But I think we are really looking to see how we can strengthen that, and I think that peer-to-peer support in the first instance is really important, along with the business case that the community teams will develop. Have to think about condition and thinking about how are they going to engage in life cycle costing, so that it's really thought up really clearly about how many years until they have to do life cycle replacement of certain elements of the building, so that our groups are going into it with their eyes really wide open.
Thank you, Chair. And just to add a little bit to what Mark and Andrew have said so far, and I think it just shows the complexity of the matter really that we're talking about today in terms of community asset transfer. But we have, Mark had a slide there with all the transfers that we've done previously, and a number of them have been for quite a number of years now, and they're reporting back that this is not as easy as you first think to take on the liability of a building. There's ageing that needs further maintenance as you go down the line. And if they've got that capacity within their board or within their kind of reach at all, their organisation is in some instances starting to show, and therefore that's when you are seeing some coming back asking for councillors to support, you know. So I know that councillors supported the initial transfers as well, you know, but that's why it's really important that we get the criteria right in this policy, so that we ensure that those organisations that are taking over these buildings have got that capacity to be able to deal with it in the short, medium and long term. It's okay for us all to have aspirations within our community that this building will deliver, you know, all the things that as councillors, and I know in my own ward, you know, often feel the same, that will deliver all the things that we've got missing that we need in that space. But the reality of it is very different over time, and that's why we need to make sure that we get this policy right in a forward-looking way, instead of like we've done in the past. It's always been reactively when a building's become surplus to requirements, and it's what we're going to do with it. You know, an organisation will come, we want to use it, or a community group will come, we can do this with it, that with it, and it doesn't necessarily. I can't say that without primitive. Necessarily, there you go. Actually, in the long term, be the right thing for the community or that organisation if it's leaving them with those liabilities and difficulties with capacity for them. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Right, I've got 3 people who would like to make comments, so I'm going to ask you guys to make them in turn, because the key thing is that officers and the exec member know what we're saying, and then if officers or the exec member want to sort of sum up anything on those 3 and the wider discussion, then feel free to at the end. So in order, it is Councillor Buckley, followed immediately by Councillor Dye, followed immediately by Councillor Layton. Thank you.
Yes, it's a brief comment, Chair. I've always thought that this was a good policy because it pushes things down to a very local level, and it's an excellent policy. But Councillor Cooper makes a very important point, actually, which brings me on to my question. This energy efficiency standard and so forth, and the general condition of the buildings, is it conceivable that the council will bring the building up to standard before it disposes of it?
Okay, I think I'm coming in now before those questions are answered. Is that correct? Okay. So my comments would be, I definitely welcome these proposals. I like the clarity. I like the fact that it seems to make things fairer than they have been in the past. I did like the comments about being guided by the community, and I think that's a really important point that we learn from those organisations that have already done it. I think there's some really good learning to be done there. I had 2 questions, one of which is about, you talked about if the list is produced and there isn't an interest, that the options will be reassessed. And it was about the detail of that somehow, that I think it would be good to have as much clarity in that, i.e. if the building then goes to sale, is there a certain amount of time? I don't really know the kind of details, but some kind of level of detail that makes that as fair and transparent as the rest of the proposals are. The other one is trickier, and it's back to the EPC-B rating. I think the idea of that you came up with, Mark, of saying that there could be an agreement to lease, and then hopefully that would draw in investment externally. It was just, has that been done? Are there examples of that, or are we just thinking that would be a good thing to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. Great policy. My question is actually, it just seems a shame that some buildings are off limits. So you gave the example of like a small depot. If it was if it was owned by the council, but it's sat there empty and a community wanted to use it, it's a real shame that they wouldn't be able to access it through this policy. So just like to know a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take each in turn. So, in terms of the EPC ratings and being able to bring buildings up to standard, obviously the council's budgets are such that in order to keep the estate going that we want to retain, there's more investment required than the funding that we've got. So being able to for the council to directly invest in any property to bring it up to standard is not something that we've really got the capacity to do. But it comes back to us being able to do that signposting, linking to organisations, and then in turn being able to support looking for different pots of funding that might be available. And like I say, I mean, through our experience of community asset transfers, there are organisations out there that will help and to fund, if there's a strong business case, some of that investment. And I think equally, it's been realistic as an organisation bringing forward a community asset transfer proposal, that you might not be able to do everything all in one go, that there might be a phased approach to delivery. And again, that's probably drawing on some of the experience that other organisations can share. So hopefully that answers your question there, Councillor Buckley. In terms of the options, reassessing options, if a community asset transfer proposal doesn't come forward, I think what this probably goes hand in hand with understanding where there's a capacity and the interest in bringing forward community asset transfers, so that we're not unrealistically putting a building forward where there's absolutely no interest or likely to be no interest whatsoever. So giving it a best shot from the outset. I think in terms of that reassessing of options, as I said, what we don't want to do is tie something up. The building is at its best condition on the day that a service is moving out of it. Every week, every month that passes, and we've all seen this right across the city, a vacant building becomes a target for antisocial behaviour. Obviously, there's maintenance issues starting to creep in with unoccupied buildings. So what we can't do is just sit and wait for an organisation to come forward. So I think what we would be certainly looking for is us to be able to have that intelligence, and with a view to that community asset transfer being able to progress within a 6 month to 9 month period. And if that doesn't happen, then we would have to make that reassessment. And you pointed to capital receipts there. If there's not a community interest and we've not got a service use, then obviously that is the natural way in which that would work. In terms of the agreement to lease approach, we have adopted it. So we've not done it on a big building, but I think we've got some changing facilities, for instance, that where we've done a similar sort of approach, where there's clubs that might want to do some investment into the building, and we've with a view to then taking on the building. So we've been working with colleagues in climate energy and green space on a few examples where that has been approached in that way. So it's there is a test in terms of doing that on a bit of larger building. Clearly, we would need the certainty, and the business case would need to be in place. We'd need the certainty around funding and delivery and that sort of assurance. But the mechanism is there, and to be fair, it's something that is applied in the commercial world as well in many cases. So it's not new. It's not new, but we would absolutely need the assurance. And then around buildings being off limits, I think for us here, it's about recognising that this is around community asset transfer. It fits within the context of the legislation that's in place, and that is really around community use of buildings where there's been community use historically. And so I think we're just trying to continue to apply that as the test. And I think equally it's around managing expectations, and being able to continue that ongoing service delivery. So I think things like depots, for instance, there's probably not many community organisations that would want a depot to use as a depot. They might have other ideas for the land, but that could be applied to many other bits of land. So I think it's about managing that expectation that while we want to support community asset transfer, it can't just be applied to every bit of property that the council owns.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Cooper, do you want to make any closing remarks?
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate the opportunity. Can I thank Scrutiny Board members today for their comments? The report will be going to Executive Board next week, and I am really supportive of coming to scrutiny, pre-decision making. You probably know from the reports I've brought previously, not just to this scrutiny board, but to other scrutiny boards in terms of that. And I will make sure that your comments are reflected at executive board. And because I know the timing's been tight between scrutiny and executive board this time, due to process and so on. But a couple of things from me really. I recognise that there's some work that's going to be needed to be done on this between our communities, teams here in the council, and our third sector or other interested groups who have the capacity to perhaps put a bid together as well in terms of taking on a community asset transfer, and also have the capacity to get that funding in place to bring the building up to a standard that would be required for them to deliver the community facility out of it as well. I'm also really still committed to working with members either on an individual ward basis or more collectively around a workshop or an all-member briefing, or indeed coming to scrutiny about the experience of others around community asset transfer as well. I've already been dealing with many members over a number of years around buildings in their ward that may have wanted to become community asset transfers, and we've had a number of successes within that. And I want to just reassure scrutiny that commitment will continue with the new policy as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So my suggestion is that we, because of the nature of the minutes not being released from this until after exec board, is that I just send an email off with a sort of a sum up of the comments we've made. Is that okay by everyone? Beautiful. In which case, I'm going to give you 4 minutes for a comfort break, and then we'll come back with BNG. Thank you very much for coming, guys. Brilliant. Thanks very much and welcome back. So we'll move now on to item 9. I've invited Jonathan to deliver this presentation at the earliest possible stage of policy development in this area. Legislation came into force in February 2024, and it's vital we ensure we understand the potential of this policy and the potential opportunities it may present for the council. The discussion today provides an opportunity for scrutiny members to provide a view on the direction of travel. And if we're in agreement, I would recommend the successor scrutiny board revisits this issue to assess progress in a year's time. Jonathan, Jonathan Squared, would you like to introduce yourselves? Thank you.
It was my fault. I'm Jonathan Moxon. I'm the exec manager for flood risk and climate resilience. So I work within city development, and my team sit within highways and transportation. I'll set some context in that most of our visits here are around flood risk activities. So we bring an annual report to this board that sort of charts the progress that we're making against the council's flood risk management strategy. That's the sort of statutory duty that flood risk management carry out on behalf of the council. Today's topic is one that the flood risk management teams are heavily involved in looking at, along with planning colleagues and colleagues from climate, energy and green space. So I'm going to give, I suppose, it's not what you would normally necessarily see from us, but equally it was quite a useful opportunity because I'm conscious some of you are newer to this board and won't have heard our reports in the past. So anything flood or planning flood or building schemes and managing assets and keeping the city dry wherever we can, that's my team, and happy for you to ask me about that. Today is more of a planning focused thing, and it's about the river unit side of biodiversity net gain.
I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor, and I'm the executive member for economy, transport and sustainable development, and planning comes under that.
Okay, lovely. So should we crack on with the presentation, please?
Yes, thank you. So hopefully I won't teach you all to suck eggs here. I've left it quite high level. So apologies if I've not pitched this right, but I am conscious. I think biodiversity net gain is quite new to lots of people. And I think council officers are in that bracket as well. So I'll cover off where it comes from in terms of a legislation perspective, where we're at in terms of policy, and then some of the sort of things we might need to consider, and then just open that up to sort of have a discussion and get some guidance before we start to put some more formal policies and processes forward. I am conscious there are other work streams on biodiversity net gain, particularly around terrestrial units. The focus today is on the river unit side of it, so I'll try and explain that if that's okay. So the Environment Act that came in 2021 made some quite significant changes in relation to our requirement and our commitment through the planning system to improve nature, enhance nature across the country, and one of those specifically around the biodiversity that we see on land and in rivers, and with a view that that wouldn't just be preserved or loss mitigated, that actually we'd see a tangible net gain, which is where the biodiversity net gain sort of phrase comes from. So that's written into legislation. That legislation has started to feed through into policy, and there's a requirement on local planning authorities to write that policy and provide the sort of policies and procedures that mean that we see that in practice. There's a couple of different elements to this. There is an element of us through the planning system ensuring that people are meeting those requirements, but there is also a role for us to play in facilitating its delivery, and that's probably what I'd focus on a little bit more today. At a more regional level, local nature recovery strategies are actually the responsibility of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We feed into that as a local authority, but it's their responsibility to sort of put in place a strategy that's suitable for nature recovery in the region. So I'm conscious the slides afterwards might be useful, so I just sort of tried to reference some of the planning sections. NPPF is National Planning policy framework. So that guides a lot of the sort of local policies that we put in place, and there's a level of interpretation to make that suitable for Leeds City Council planning policy. But a lot of the decisions we make are still based on national planning policy. Biodiversity net gain is now mandatory and it is now live. It got delayed a few times, but technically did come into force in February for major applications and then all other applications. And I certainly know from a flood risk perspective, my teams comment on every application. We don't just do majors. Some local authorities do make the distinction, and I think here in Leeds we don't. So BNG is something that it'd be quite an extensive requirement for us to assess and ensure that those requirements are being met through all planning applications. There is a little caveat at the bottom around some of the exclusions that are included, PD being permitted development. There is work going on principally by planning colleagues around the creation of a special purpose vehicle around a habitat bank. This is a principle that's been looked at across the country with sort of different approaches being taken in different places. An exec board decision was taken earlier this year, right at the start of the year, to say that work to try and understand what the requirement is for that, how it would work, should be delegated to directors, and that work could take place over the next year. So that work's happening in the background in terms of, I suppose, the principle of exploring that has been agreed at exec board, that how that will work in practice, the legal requirements, the actual establishment and setting up of a company, a special purpose vehicle to facilitate that hasn't actually completed. That's ongoing work. For the council's view, I suppose supporting the need for a habitat bank is that we do want to support biodiversity net gain. We do want to see that those requirements are seen in full. One of the important legal elements of this is, although we are quite an extensive landowner in the city, particularly of green spaces, we can't use this. Section 106 is the mechanism for the agreement around the delivery of biodiversity net gain, and we can't enter into a Section 106 agreement with ourselves, and therefore an intermediate body, a special purpose vehicle, could be the answer to facilitate that. Equally, it could be a third party, and we could therefore see land transferred into a third party's ownership, and then that deal to protect the habitat and see the biodiversity improvement could be done through that mechanism as well. As you would imagine, with new legislation came some regulations and some guidance. So I'm just going to reference in the report, there's some links in here as well out to the guidance in terms of the principles that we try and bring forward. Those principles, they're laid out, I suppose, are quite brief, but they do help to sort of guide the sort of key criteria that we're trying to address through the principle of biodiversity net gain. There is planning policy and guidance notes on the council's website. And what's been developed nationally are a series of metrics and tools. There's actually quite a specific set of requirements around the people that can do some of these assessments in terms of their ecology qualifications, and the certain training courses that they've undertaken for them to be accredited as BNG assessors. The river units part of that does carry a specific requirement as well. So these are things, again, as an authority that we're having to sort of consider. Do we develop those skills and those capabilities within the council, or do we buy that service in? For developments by private developers that come forward, they would be required to have those skills within their supply chain or within their own organisations, and we would be required to assess what they've provided through the planning system. I suppose the most familiar thing I have as an example would be if someone puts a flood risk assessment forward, our teams wouldn't do that flood risk assessment for that developer. We would be marking their homework in effect, and BNG will work in a similar way in that they will need to provide the relevant details and do the assessments, and we would be checking whether that's compliant and is suitable through the planning system. That said, and I'll come on to it in a second, what we do really need to consider as well is that as an authority, we build a lot of things as well. We own a lot of properties, and we sort of facilitate development, and we do a lot of infrastructure projects, and therefore lots of our own programme will have to deliver biodiversity net gain improvements as well. And we need to consider the skills that we need in-house or within our supply chain to make sure we're also compliant for our own schemes. Just to focus on watercourse or river units, just as an example, the types of things that we might be trying to assess is its current condition. So what type of channel do we see along that stretch of watercourse? And when we're going to make an intervention through a development or a project, what impact would that have? What changes would we see? And therefore, what level of loss would we need to mitigate? And what amount of gain would we need to put in place? So typically, watercourses and rivers around Leeds quite varied. We have some that are very heavily engineered. We have some that are quite natural, some that are very small and dry most of the year, and some like the River Aire that are obviously very large watercourse. Yeah. As an example of what we're starting to look at in the background is to try and start with the data that we hold. We are very data rich in the council. And so what we've started to do is look at where we've got council ownership, where that aligns with our existing plans for green spaces and nature recovery. And then where we've got watercourses, particularly those watercourses that the council already manages. And could we make improvements holistically along a stretch of watercourse rather than being piecemeal across the city? So we have started focusing our efforts and energies around some of the parks and green spaces around the city that we've got quite a heavy involvement in already. And that also aligns, this is for the river credit side of things, river unit side of things, but the terrestrial units, which is the sort of on-land improvements to biodiversity, also align with that sort of taking that approach as well. It's just another example. So the likes of Middleton, Golden Acre Park, Temple Newsham would typically offer quite good opportunities where we've got natural watercourses that have been modified at some point with culverts or bridge crossings, or they've got channel side walls, or they've been straightened over time, and they might offer quite good opportunities to renaturalize those watercourses using the BNG mechanism. This is clearly for us to be able to try and offer opportunities to deliver river units in places that are not on the development itself or on the project itself that's needing to sort of deliver a BNG unit. This is our ability to try and strategically look at where are the places around the city that we've got some ownership, we've got some ability, an opportunity to make an improvement and offer that to our own projects and also to private developers if they've not already got a solution on their own site. This is my last slide. So just to highlight, I suppose, a few of the things that we maybe are considering currently, or some of the things that we might need to focus on going forward and leave them for the discussion. I think the data and mapping is an important starting point. We are quite data rich, but we do need to start to continue to do that work. We are looking at working with the Calder and Colne Rivers Trust, which do have part of their catchment is in Leeds, but they are seen as the sort of leading Rivers Trust authority in the region around BNG and particular river units. So we're working with them. We've got a session later this month. We'd like to continue to work with planning and climate, energy and green space colleagues to align what we do around river units with what we do around terrestrial and hedgerow units. So that work's underway. We haven't seen many requests come forward for river units. That does seem to be something that is extremely new. I think terrestrial units, we have pushed that a little bit further because there's more requests and more assessment coming through the planning system already. So it's a work in progress, it's safe to say. We're aware of the work to create a habitat bank or to look at what's possible. We are also, as part of what we're doing on Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme Phase 2, we are also looking at the creation of a special purpose vehicle that's around natural flood management in the upper catchment of the Aire. So largely away from Leeds but benefits Leeds. And it could be that that special purpose vehicle actually does align with biodiversity net gain as well. But what we'll do is look at what is the right vehicle to take this forward. So we've got a couple of options that we're exploring at the moment. We need to assess this sort of council's projects and pipeline in terms of what's the scale of the ask going forward, and would we have a sufficient offering for our own programme? Would we have sufficient to offer that to private developers as they come forward? And equally, you know, how do we make this sustainable? How do we support our current investments? But also, how do we use it as an opportunity to do something that's financially sustainable as well? There's quite a lot to do in terms of developing the systems, capabilities, people, skills, the legal side of things, and as just mentioned before, making it financially viable and sustainable. So that's the type of work that we're doing in the background at the moment. And that's sort of just a whistle-stop tour around what we've got to consider, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. That was a really helpful set of slides. I've already got Councillor Wilson who'd like to make comment, and I'm looking for any other indications while he speaks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that presentation. Very interesting. And great that it's coming to scrutiny so early in the process. That's brilliant. Two questions. One is just a clarifying question. I can see that we have a duty to work on biodiversity net gain for new where there's like planning applications and things like that. Obviously, a lot of what you're talking about is what we're doing on sites that perhaps there isn't a planning application, but we own them or are looking after them. So is that more coming from us as a body that's interested in biodiversity net gain, or is there perhaps I didn't catch it, is there another kind of duty on us to make sure there's biodiversity net gain on land and assets that we already own? And then secondly, I suppose regardless of the answer to that, there are obviously quite a lot of particularly I think housing sites where there's an ongoing public amenity that was part of the original planning permission. I can certainly think of a few in my ward where the developers have to maintain some public amenity, some green space or whatever, and sometimes they've like sold that off to a separate company or the residents co-own it or what have you. Are those, and I appreciate you're talking mostly on waterways, but are those public amenities part of this? Will they have to, will this go into the definition of what is considered keeping a public amenity? And will any of those that are currently there have to sort of update how they look after those sites in light of biodiversity net gain? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Jonathan, if you're right to also just stop sharing your screen for us before you answer, just so folk can see your face.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense, Councillor Wilson. So I think first part of the question, I think there's an anticipation that most developments will struggle to deliver the net gain on their own site. And therefore, I think, you know, across the country, there's just an anticipation that offering alternative sites for off-site units is very likely to be needed. I think the requirement in the legislation is to try and deliver the units at source wherever possible. So I think that would be the push from our officers, would be that wherever possible, we need to see those units being accommodated within the plans that come forward on those sites, and that the developer deals with that as part of their application. I suppose for a long time, we've had lots of discussions around things like sustainable urban drainage, where that's the requirement at the moment, but actually we see quite often we do see a compromise around the balance of what they need to provide on site, the management of it by a third party, or the mechanism for paying that going forward. And I think what we'll probably see is that we need to do wherever possible. I think we need to align these requirements. So an amenity green space with a biodiversity net gain scheme with a SUD scheme, ideally, can we design those schemes to be multifunctional, and for the arrangements to maintain those interventions be combined and brought together, so what you haven't got is a conflict between the land use or compromise around the space that's used. It could be that this is a very positive place for us to be, because I think the council has got a very strong aspiration to improve green space and biodiversity across the city. There's a regional push to see nature recovery. So this could be a great mechanism for that, where funding for green projects and nature recovery has been so difficult to come by. This could be a really good long-term mechanism for not just doing a capital intervention, but doing the maintenance in the long term, because they come with 30-year agreements. But there is a real need for us to try and offer alternative solutions so that we don't lose out on the things that would suit us as a city. But we do want to see those developments solve that problem at source where they can.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And that really summed up why I wanted it to come so early, so that we don't lose out on those opportunities. That's exactly it. Councillor Dye?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I wondered if you could give us some examples of the kind of work that would possibly be able to count. So one of the things I was thinking about was, does cleaning of a watercourse count, you know, in terms of looking at measures like that you might imagine if you've got a polluted watercourse and we put effort into cleaning it up, that would improve the biodiversity. Is that the kind of thing, or what kind of things would specifically count in terms of the units? Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, it makes total sense. I'll be honest, I think we're still getting to grips with the sort of potential for the right things to do for Leeds watercourses. Obviously, some of our urban watercourses are very different to some of those watercourses further up the catchment or up in the uplands. There is an element around, if you improve water quality, biodiversity can improve. They put a lot of weighting on physical features. So they talk about the sort of the level of encroachment. So if a watercourse is quite natural and it's got, say if it was a field used for livestock that was up against a watercourse, they would look at, or we would look at, a 10-meter buffer either side around, can we improve the sort of separation from activities that encroach on that watercourse, like cattle poaching the riverside and causing pollution to the watercourse, or agricultural runoff, where actually there could be a vegetation strip rather than heavily grazed pasture right up to it. Other obvious encroachment ones would be culverts, where a watercourse isn't in the daylight, it's going through pipes or underground, or where there's a heavily sort of engineered channel side. So it could be a vertical wall, when actually could that be replaced by a more naturalized embankment that offers the opportunity to introduce vegetation. The other thing would be around the naturalized course of that watercourse. So if it's quite direct and straight and there's not a lot of variation in the water flow, the sort of a number, you know, invertebrates, fish, bird life all benefit from a quite varied channel flow. So pools of deeper water, areas of shallow water, some fast flowing, some slow, areas of shade, and that sort of what they call geomorphology in the trade, in terms of the way that the river functions and its morphology, its shape and its function. The things that enhance that are really heavily weighted. I think water quality on its own possibly doesn't tick the box as much, but we do know that improvements in water quality does bring some about some of those benefits. So I think we need to look at both of those elements. One of the things we will want to look at is, if we were to improve a 10-meter stretch, because that ticks a box and gives us one credit, but we do nothing else upstream and downstream of that, that seems like a lost opportunity. Whereas I think if we can see a more tactical approach, where we've got a watercourse from top to bottom, and we over a series of 10 years or whatever, we see a series of improvements that mean that that whole water course is improved, that does score better from a sort of holistic perspective in the credits and the units, but it also makes sense anyway. You know, we'd see sort of a bigger biodiversity gain from doing a system approach along a full watercourse than we would do in piecemeal and opportunistic. I think we can be a bit more planned than that.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to move us on to the quick fire questions. So I've got Councillor Scopes, followed immediately by Councillor Thompson, followed immediately by Councillor Robinson. And then Jonathan, if you want to come back in on all of them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so a comment and a question. So the comment is around just making sure we also get our inner city areas. I think it's easy to imagine how we get to a point where we did our nice rivers and outer areas, but places like Holbeck have waterways through them and increasing biodiversity there, particularly if it means that there's more access to the waterway for local residents. I think that could be very positive. Obviously, that would be a side gain because biodiversity is the priority, but I think if we can do those wider things, that'd be good. And then just in terms of the section 106, you said we can't do it ourselves, and I just push back on that. I'd like some more details, but certainly in terms of 106, we do loads of works in our green spaces where we have the money and then the councillors decide specifically how that money is spent, and then the council does works to the green spaces. So I'm not sure how that is different to what you're proposing. So I just challenge to push a little bit more on that. And my concern about a special purpose vehicle is whether it's needed. So is there excess costs that aren't needed to be met, and two, around accountability. And I think there's always something around stuff that's removed from us is less accountable, because there's no organisation that is as accountable as a democratic organisation like the council. Thank you.
Thank you. So just concerns about waterways within development. So we've got some existing issues with diverted waterways, lack of biodiversity, lack of maintenance. So how do we push for that in future developments where there's a water, say a mill stream? If you're redeveloping an old mill site, how do we work with that to make sure there's a positive impact rather than a negative one on the surroundings? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sort of a point and a question, I think. You talked about the BNG assessors there, Jonathan. I think I'm trying to get my head around it in what you were saying there, but I think there's a real risk that this could become a cottage industry, and we don't actually understand how that impacts some of the things that are going on in terms of planning or our own wards. So I think I'd appreciate sort of more clarity on that. I know it's early days. And then you talked about off-site units as well. Are we thinking that that means off-site units across West Yorkshire? So the example that was used was Aire Valley that was there. So it goes outside of Leeds. I think that potentially is detrimental to what we could deliver within the Leeds district.
Okay, so Councillor Scopes, I think my initial interpretation of the metrics is that actually urban watercourses could be really good because they've been heavily modified. So it could be that we get some real gains in places where we've really struggled to do biodiversity improvements. Holbeck's a great example of where actually, you know, when you balance flood risk, which is another challenge here, that introducing biodiversity features into a channel that you're managing from a flood risk perspective has often been a challenge. But I think with the sort of added benefit of, one, it's a requirement through planning, and it comes with a long-term agreement, and it comes with funding. All of a sudden, I think that really gives us the opportunity to do a lot more with it. I think lots of urban watercourses are straightened, even things that could just go around playing fields that go, you know, between residential areas have been straightened because we've probably not taken the approach that we could have done now in the past, and therefore, yeah, I think urban watercourses offer a real good opportunity. You look at the places like, well, Millgoyts are a good example. You know, we've done Leeds Fast 2 through the Kirkstall stretch. There's lots of Millgoyts there that we've made some intervention around flood risk, but actually there should be good opportunities there in terms of doing improvements to channels that were straight and engineered and were meant to move water quickly so that they've powered a mill. Well, actually, they don't need to do that anymore, so they offer an opportunity to do something different. But they're also really good places to go for a walk, whether it's with your kids or a dog or whatever. And I think we'd be missing a trick if the metric doesn't drive public access, but I think utilising the sort of urban green spaces or the parks that we've got within the city to do improvements from a biodiversity point of view will lend themselves really well to being places that are just nicer to go, and so I think there's a dual opportunity there, I think. So Councillor Thompson, so picking up on what I've just said, this should give us a better toolkit to see. My teams in particular, we've been with our policies against culverting for a long time anyway, but we do really fight for that in terms of maintaining watercourses being open. This might mean that we can push the other way and actually see watercourses that have been kept underground for a long time opened up, and that access to the river and improved. I think it doesn't help us in the past with developments that have gone in the past, unless those development sites are in a place where that same developer owns that site, and actually retrospectively that past site might offer a better opportunity because the developer can deliver their own units on another site that they own. So it could be that we could say, well, actually the influence is, we think in hindsight we would have done a better job on the site that you brought forward 10 years ago. Can we look at that again? I think from a BNG assessor's point of view, Councillor Robinson, I think we don't know, if I'm honest. I think we need to consider, could we have the right skills within the council officers that are looking at this now? What does that require? Is that sustainable? There's a challenge around, can we keep those people? And I think we see that for other technical disciplines. But I think that's something we're seriously considering. Can we? I know the approach that colleagues in climate, energy, and green spaces that have taken is they have employed an ecologist and they've brought someone in to do the terrestrial assessments. They're not qualified to do the river unit assessments at the moment. So therefore, I suppose there's a positive in that mechanism has worked for them, and we could probably just expand on that a little bit. We work with ecologists within our supply chain all the time. So I suppose there's an element of, we've got trusted relationships. We work with them on a lot of other projects. So therefore it'd be an extension of that. I do think there's a requirement for us to understand the legislation properly though, so that when we're driving the changes, we're not being driven by the supply chain. But yeah, I think that's something we need to come back with in terms of what approach we think is best. But we do need to be an intelligent client. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Any closing remarks, Councillor Pryor? Beautiful. Okay. In which case, hopefully that has helped Jonathan to give a bit of a steer on the thoughts members are having around BNG. I guess my suggestion would be that we request the next board brings it back, and potentially based on the wider stakeholders that you've mentioned in your presentation, we perhaps look to invite those as well, like the Rivers Trusts that you were talking about and such like. So maybe make it a slightly larger item in a year's time with a few extra folk, maybe from planning and things as well. So I will put that forward moving on. I will move us straight on to number 10, which is the work schedule. Becky is working very diligently hard on creating said work schedule based on our previous meeting. And we need to anticipate that there will be invitations coming out pretty fast for different trainings and different stuff that we've requested and working groups that we've requested in our last meeting. So do keep your eyes peeled for those. And are members happy to just accept the work schedule as written in the papers, or is there any comments to be made? No. The only comment I'd record is that it's a hard piece of work and I'm grateful that you are doing it. In terms of the next meeting, theoretically, I would tell you it takes place on the 25th of September at 10:30, but we've had a request around the timing, so I can tell you it will take place on the 25th of September 2024, but I will confirm the time in writing via email. All right, folks, thank you.